Welcome back, everybody. My name's Tank, and in this video, we're going to be discussing something that comes up quite often whenever we talk about live performances or touring bands or anything like that, and that is the topic of tracks, also known as backing tracks or playback tracks. And the question that always comes up, are bands that use playback tracks actually real musicians? And it's always a funny conversation because the answers seem to be very split, and a lot of people get very fired up over this specific topic. Now, if this is your first time seeing any content on this channel, I have a very familiar background with tracks in a live setting with bands. I've been a roadie for 15 years of my adult life. I've been teching guitars, drums, bass, and I've done playback tracks for bands in the past. So in this video, I actually kind of want to explain a few things and talk about a few things. Mainly one thing that just happened the other day involving Polyphia and their drummer, because that seems to be what sparked the newest edition of this conversation. So sit back, relax. Hopefully I answer some questions for you. And by the end of this, if you have any more, feel free to drop them in the comments and we can continue the discussion there. So to start us off here, I actually want to talk about what tracks actually are. And there might be some people watching this that already know what tracks are. There might be some people that are familiar with it and think they know exactly what they're used for. But there's a lot of confusion every time this conversation comes up about what tracks actually do. It seems pretty split, honestly. Some people understand what they're used for, and other people immediately think that backing tracks are used for bands to basically just fake it. In their heads, they think like it's a Milli Vanilli situation where everybody's just lip syncing and faking their parts. And 99% of the time, that is absolutely not the case. Backing tracks, when they're used live on tour, are pre-recorded parts that are usually taken straight from the albums that were recorded that can be used in a live setting on playback. Now, there's a lot of different ways that bands can run tracks. The most common way that I've seen over the years on tour is usually just on Pro Tools or Ableton on a MacBook. And then most bands have Pro Tools rigs where they have MIDI running and all this other stuff, and I could sit here and explain that forever. But the short version of it is that it's actual recorded tracks that can be fed to the front of house engineer that he can then mix in the PA to go with all of the rest of the music that's going on. And like I just mentioned, most of the time this is not used for bands to just fake it or do anything like that. It's usually just parts that are on albums that are impossible to play live. For example, if it's a 5-piece band and they don't have a symphony orchestra with them, but they're a symphonic band and they have those parts on the album, playback allows those sounds and all those instruments to be there live, and they can be mixed up and down by the sound engineer. And there's a lot of other things too, man. There's backing vocals that are used, and that's usually just for harmonies that somebody in the band may not be doing. They might have doubled tracks in there just to make it sound a little more powerful and choruses live and stuff like that. But the bottom line here is most of these bands that tour are basically just using playback tracks as a way to give it that more full sound that you would hear on their album when it would normally be impossible for them to do that most of the time because of the amount of people that are in the band. Now, with tracks, it is absolutely crucial that the band has to stay on time with the click track for the song. And a click track is just the metronome in their in-ear monitors. It's the tempo of the song being counted so they can stay on time with the tracks. Because if a band goes off by just a beat, it's going to sound really weird because those tracks are still going to be on the same tempo while the band is off. Now, multiple members of the band could have that click track in their in-ear monitors if they would like to, but more often than not, it's just the drummer, because the drummer is the one keeping time for everybody else. And as long as that drummer stays on that click track, everybody else can follow the drummer and everything will be fine. Now, in my personal opinion, a drummer being able to play with a click track is a skill in its own, man. I see a lot of people that like to discredit drummers and say, oh, they don't know what 180 BPMs is off the top of their head. They should know that. They probably do know that. But playing along with that click is insanely skilled, man, because you have to really have a hold of yourself. You can't speed up. You can't slow down. You have to dial into that tempo and stay on it. Because again, if you get off, the playback tracks are going to be all messed up, and then the rest of the band is going to sound off with the tracks. Now, in more modern times, backing tracks are actually used for way more than just the actual stuff that you're going to hear in a live setting. With MIDI technology and digital guitar rack technology nowadays, so much stuff can be programmed into a show. You're talking lighting changes and lighting cues that go along with different parts of the songs. And then with guitar rigs, you can plug in different effects changes at different times so that the guitar player really just has to sit there and focus on what they're playing and doesn't have to worry about changing all the effects for solos and choruses and other different parts. It can be all pre-programmed, but once again, it is crucial that the drummer has to stay on the click track for that song. Otherwise, all of those changes and all of those lighting cues and all those tracks are going to be completely off. So now that we've actually talked about tracks and what they can be used for in a live setting, let's actually talk about the situation that just happened recently that has caused this latest argument online to start. So on May 27th, Polyphia was playing a set at the So What Music Festival in Texas. And somewhere during that set, their drummer, Clay, his in-ears completely went out. Now, I don't know the specifics. I don't know if it was his actual in-ear monitors or if it was the wireless pack. The articles and the information that's come out as of now hasn't really been that specific. But somewhere in that set, his ears went out and he had an oh shit moment. Literally, I believe I saw in that TikTok video of it that he turned over to his drum tech and said, I can't hear shit. And in the spur of the moment, the drum tech decided that because he could hear the click and the tracks in his ears, he was going to keep time on Clay's leg for the rest of the set. And there's literally a video of this where their drum tech is tapping on the back of Clay's calf, keeping time with the tracks and Clay drumming along. That is insane to me, man. As a roadie, as somebody that's been around and done this for years, that is legendary roadie moment. Like up there with like Renee Martinez swapping out guitar straps while Stevie Ray Vaughan is just shredding in the moment, man. Now, there's so many questions I have about this, but because I wasn't there and because the articles I've seen haven't gone into detail, I really don't know what actually happened, man. And a lot of my touring friends and I have been talking about this the last couple days and talking about how we would have handled this in the situation. There's so many ifs and ands and buts, but again, if I didn't say it enough already, I don't know what the actual situation was. Now, when we tour in settings like this, our first go-to would be backup in-ears. A lot of monitor engineers carry universal earbuds. A lot of band members have backup ears just in case they break because they do go down. I've often in shows had one of my ears just go out, like a driver blew out or a cable got messed up. Very rare that both would go out at the same time. I don't know if that's what happened here. But if they're running wireless packs as well for all of their monitors, that pack could have gone out. But I don't think that's the case because in the moment, the drum tech could have just taken his pack and given it to Clay so he could hear what was going on, unless they had vastly different mixes. There's so much stuff in this situation that I can't accurately say what I would have done or how it should have been handled. But the way that it was handled is insane, man. And I have to commend Clay and his drum tech. I believe his name is Chris. Hopefully I didn't mess that up. Both of those guys handled an insanely stressful situation in just a remarkable way, man. I mean, seriously, from one roadie to another. But think about the importance of the tracks that I was talking about earlier in the video. How much stuff it runs, pedal board changes, lighting changes, the backing tracks. Think about that in that moment, man. Not only can Clay not hear what's going on at all, but his tech actually has to stay in perfect time, tapping what he's hearing in his ears. If they fall off by a beat, that show falls apart, man. It's insane. When I was reading this story, I was just like, I kind of wish I could have been there to see this, because it's wild, man. I've never heard of something like this happening ever. So because of the times that we're currently living in, everything makes it on the internet, and this is no different. Like a couple days after this happened, there was a TikTok video that kind of went viral. There were articles on Loudwire and a bunch of other outlets, and even discussions on Instagram, man, were really wild, because it seemed to me like most professional level touring musicians knew what happened, understood how severe this was, and were commending these guys. Like, I even saw Gary Holt, like, literally be like, this is fucking awesome on an Instagram post. And a ton of other musicians were saying that as well. But, like the internet, anytime something happens, there's a bunch of people that come out of the woodworks with an opinion on something that they really don't know anything about. And again, this was no different. When I first started reading about this situation online and seeing the comments on Instagram about this, I was kind of blown away, man. I couldn't believe so many people were tearing down Polyphia and Clay, more specifically. Comments like, well, if he's the drummer, shouldn't he just know time and not need a click? And all these comments about real musicians don't need tracks and real musicians don't need a click track and stuff like that. And then when I thought about it, I realized I used to be that way. When I was an ignorant teenager in the early 2000s, I thought the same thing, man. I had dumb opinions about musicians where said, oh, real musicians don't need click and real musicians don't need tracks. And I was that bass player when I was younger that was like, real bass players don't play with a pick. And then at some point you grow up and you realize that people do different things. And I really realized in the moment, looking back on it now, that all of that just came from a place of ignorance. I just didn't fully understand how tracks worked and how they were used in a live setting. And especially with the way that technology has progressed, at the time, I didn't realize how many of my favorite bands were actually using playback tracks live. And I'm telling you guys right now, there are a few exceptions, but so many of your favorite bands use tracks live. It's way, way more rare to find a band that has no track system whatsoever than a band that is using it. And one of the really big arguments that you see from these people that are so against it are people that are like, I remember back in the day, man, bands didn't need click or tracks or anything like that. They could just go up there and play their own instruments, man. I was like, what are you talking about? Like back in the 70s and 80s? Because that technology wasn't there. Because all of these I remember back when bands that were touring back then, that are still touring now, are all using tracks. I've seen it with my own eyes with legacy touring bands that have been around since the 80s. Everybody is using click tracks. Everybody is using backing tracks. It makes for a better show overall, especially when it's utilized just to make it a better performance and not just relying on it for other parts. But still, a lot of people took this opportunity to just rag on Clay and be like, this guy's not as good as I thought he was. If he needs a click, he's not a real drummer. If these guys need tracks, they're not a real band. And it's just, I just don't get the argument, man. And I can only assume, again, it's coming from a place of ignorance. It's just people that don't understand how this stuff is actually working. I guarantee you, a drummer like Clay knows what tempos he's playing. He knows his parts. He doesn't need to rely on a click track to play in a live setting. He uses that click track, and then the band relies on him to keep time so that all of their programmed changes and all of that stuff goes correctly. And all of these people that keep making the argument of, oh, way back in the day, bands didn't use anything to keep time. What does a conductor do? Seriously, man. Just modern click tracks are the same thing that, symphonies had a conductor for, just in a computer feeding into your ears, man. Technology changes and evolves, and all of these bands get on board with those changes. At this point, I assume that a lot of people that rag on tracks and stuff like that are just people that are in bands that have never used them or don't have that system available to them. And if they did, I guarantee you they'd use it, man. I mean, take for example, we're on iPhone 13, I think, something like that. Do you still use a block Nokia phone from 1997 just because I remember back when you didn't need all that stuff on a phone? No, we use the latest technology in any way possible to make our lives easier, and in this case, live shows better for the people that are paying to go see a show. Now, I sense I'm getting a little ranty, so I'm going to stop myself. I always start these videos thinking I'm going to have a clear, coherent talk about things, and then I get fired up and just trail off. So I'm going to stop giving you my opinion, and I'm just going to give you the opinion of a professional drummer that I talked to about this situation. And that drummer's name is Billy Freeman. He is a drummer in the country market in Nashville, Tennessee, somebody that I've toured with. I've loved watching him play all the time, every chance I got, especially when we were on tour. But he's also the reigning Drumeo Country Drummer of the Year. And this guy's talent goes way beyond that, dude. My first day on tour with him, I watched this guy do his drumline check to Bleed by Meshuggah flawlessly. I was blown away. I was like, all right, cool. So this guy knows what he's doing, man. And I texted him because I hadn't talked to him in a while. I explained the situation to him of what happened. And I said, hey, can I get your thoughts on this? And can I possibly quote you on a video? And he said, sure, go for it. So I'm going to read directly on the text so I don't misquote him. But after I explained the situation, I said, what would you do in this situation? And he said, you either go tracks or use a wedge and have an audible click. And what that means for anybody that's not familiar with a wedge is just an actual big monitor wedge right next to the drummer. And then you feed that click track through to him, Clay, in this situation. And he has to stay on time with that. Now, that can get incredibly difficult because how loud drums are. If that monitor isn't pumping out the click enough, he might not hear it. I mean, there's a lot to go wrong. So that's a really tough situation. But he went on to say, if you can't do one of those, I'd say you're fucked. I mean, come on, man. You know, that's what I would think in this situation too, but we saw that Clay and his tech pulled it off. And then he finally added by saying tapping a tempo on someone's leg might be possible, but I definitely wouldn't want to be in that situation. And we can see it's not just might be possible, it's possible because they pulled it off, man. But there you have it. Just giving that scenario to another professional drummer, he doesn't want it. Nobody wants that. That's a musician's worst nightmare, man. But it's also super interesting for me to hear the opinions of other people trying to think of themselves in those scenarios. But bottom line, in this situation and in this discussion, tracks are so common in the music industry nowadays, in the live touring settings, that it should not take away any ability from these bands. It should not take away any credit from their actual skill. Any bands that do or don't use tracks, it doesn't make them better than one another at all. Tracks are just another instrument that can be used in the modern age that we're in a live show, both for backing tracks for the parts that you may hear on a record that they can't pull off live because of band members and stuff like that, and for lighting cues and special effect cues and pedal board changes. I am personally all for tracks in the music industry if a band wants to use them. I don't think any more or less of a band that uses them, and I don't think you should either. And especially in this situation with Polyphia, this does not diminish them as artists at all, no matter how hard some people on the internet have tried. We all know that these guys can play their instruments without a click or without backing tracks or anything like that. This was just a very rare, unfortunate situation that happened to a band while they were on tour using backing tracks. And again, I thought they handled it fantastically. But that's going to wrap this up. Hopefully I explained everything clearly and coherently enough and it wasn't ranty and crazy at some parts. But if you do have any questions about this or any funny stories that you've heard about bands with tracks or anything like that, drop them in the comments below, man. I'll continue the conversation with you because I like to talk about this live touring production kind of stuff. And I think it doesn't hurt that everybody talks and learns more about this kind of stuff. There's probably a lot that I could learn from some of you in the comments too. So thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video. I'm on a ton of different other social media. We have a Discord server. I stream on Twitch. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, I'll throw links in the description of this video. My handle on everything social media is @TankTheTech. Wherever you are in the world, be safe, be kind to each other, and I'll see you guys very soon for another video.